On the evening of April 25th, engineers made several deadly errors, including disconnecting reactor number 4's power regulating and emergency safety equipment. The reactor experienced a surge in power at 1:23 a.m., and the subsequent sequence of events resulted in an explosion that spewed more than 50 tons of radioactive material into the atmosphere. 32 people lost their lives in the days that followed, and many more experienced radioactive burns. The radioactive cloud that was emitted exposed around 8.4 million people in Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. The region is still reeling from the tragedy, which is regarded as the worst nuclear power plant accident in history. Join us as we look at 10 haunting images of the Chernobyl disaster and their backstories. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a video upload. Now, let's get started. Number 1. Radiation after the explosion was off the scale. Helicopters were flown over reactor number 4 to measure radiation levels hours after the explosion. Experts were unable to obtain an exact reading since the counters could only measure radiation levels up to 500 rems at a height of 200 meters, 656 feet, above the reactor. Helicopters dropped lead slabs weighing 40 kilograms, 88 pounds each, and several tons of radiation-absorbing sand on the reactor to contain the tragedy. The endeavor had a problem though, because the calamity was unprecedented in scope. It took us more than 24 hours to get things rolling. Our commanders were initially unsure of what to do. We took to the air to investigate the situation, flew back, and then took out again the next morning, said pilot Alexander Petrov, who arrived on the site. Number 2. A late evacuation. The Chernobyl tragedy sent 50 million curies of radiation into the atmosphere, which is around 500 Hiroshima bombs worth. Gas mask-clad policemen patrolled the streets, but the locals were kept in the dark and only heard whispers. The Soviet government was advised to evacuate Pripyat immediately by Armin Abagin, who at the time served as the director of one of the Moscow nuclear power research institutes. Children were playing in the streets, and people were air-drying their laundry. The air was radioactive too, Abagin recalled. The metallic smell in the air and the altered atmosphere caused the locals to become alarmed. At the tail end of April 26th, an evacuation was ordered, and 47,000 Pripyat residents were relocated using 1,200 buses and 200 trucks. The locals expected to return to their homes later, but this never happened. Number 3. Contamination spreads to other countries. The radiation was dispersed across a larger region by the vehicles used to transport the population out of Pripyat. The evacuation took 3.5 hours. According to a local, lines of crowded buses exited the city, kilometer after kilometer, one after the other, like enormous insects. There was a ton of traffic. Only a survivor of the Second World War can envision a sight like that. Days after the original catastrophe, the wind shifted and started to blow significant levels of radioactivity in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. The authorities assured locals that everything was normal as the city held its yearly May Day parades. Officials finally advised Kyiv residents to avoid eating leafy vegetables and to stay inside 11 days after the catastrophe. Later in May, the Russian First Deputy Health Minister also warned that, contrary to popular belief, drinking vodka and red wine did not alleviate radiation exposure. In the end, more than 500,000 Ukrainians were made to abandon their homes. Number 4. Military reserves made their own protective clothing. Since the cleanup effort started in 1986, more than 600,000 civil and military employees have received the honorary title of Chernobyl Liquidators. Robots from West Germany, Japan, and Russia were first employed to assist in cleaning the debris, but the high radiation levels rendered them inoperable. Instead, humans were brought in to do the work with a 40-second exposure time limit. Since the majority of the liquidators were military reserves, the army lacked sufficient uniforms that could be worn while working with radioactive materials. Instead, to assist safeguard the spine and bone marrow, reserves created their own protective equipment utilizing lead sheets up to 4 millimeters thick as aprons. The creative ones also added a vine leaf for added comfort, according to photographer Igor Kostin. Since then, many of the liquidators have experienced serious health issues, some of which have been deadly. Number 5. Doctors facing mortality. One of the several medical professionals and researchers from 15 different countries who were called in to assist with the disaster's aftermath was Dr. Robert Peter Gale, also known as the Chernobyl Doctor. Dr. Gale cared for individuals whose radiation exposure was so extreme that a bone marrow transplant was ineffective in saving them. A patient will typically pass away in 4 weeks if they don't have healthy bone marrow in their bodies. Due to the slow hair loss and minor skin darkening being the only apparent indicators of radiation exposure, it was also challenging to determine how much radiation the patients had been exposed to. Dr. Gale and the director of the Central Institute for Advanced Medical Studies of the Soviet Union signed a contract in 1986 to monitor the 100,000 residents of the Danger Zone, which was Chernobyl's exclusion zone's 30-kilometer, 18.7-mile perimeter. A doctor deals with life and death every day. However, death is a biological occurrence for us. We don't consider our own demise. Chernobyl's events caused me to reflect on my own mortality as well as that of everyone else. Sadly, it takes these tragic events to make this point clear to us. Number 6. The Buried Villages. 7 kilometers, 4.3 miles, separate the Chernobyl accident site from the settlement of Kopachi. The Soviet army completely destroyed and buried the homes of Kopachi, leaving this place desolate and frightening. However, this strategy only had a negative impact. Kopachi was really heavily contaminated, therefore it was decided to bury it house by house, Chernobyl tour guide Yuri Tatarchuk said. At the time, it seemed like a good idea, but it wasn't. As a result of the digging, contamination increased because radioactive material was pushed closer to the water table and deeper into the soil. Only 2 structures are still in existence today, one of which is the former kindergarten, where kids weren't evacuated until 36 hours after exposure. Tatarchuk characterized the consequences as criminal. At the time, at least 5,000 people suffered severe consequences, and pregnant women were only advised to undergo abortions. Number 7. Puppies of Chernobyl. There is a misconception that no life can endure in Chernobyl, but this is untrue. The exclusion zone is home to more than 900 stray dogs, according to estimates. Many may be seen having fun within the former power plant's abandoned cooling tower. The residents were given only a few hours' notice before they were evacuated and were instructed to only take essential personal belongings and a certain amount of food. The puppies are thought to be descendants of the pet dogs that their owners left behind. The wild wolves that live in the area have chased the dogs out of the woods. The charitable organization Dogs of Chernobyl has now been established by volunteers, including veterinarians and radiation specialists. The dogs are radioactively marked, and this is investigated. They are also employed in the study of illnesses like rabies. Radiation sensors and GPS receivers have been mounted on certain dogs, helping to track the radiation levels within the exclusion zone. Number 8. Birth defects among the children of Chernobyl. Authorities in Kyiv gave residents advice to take regular, warm showers, keep their windows closed, and wash their furnishings frequently after the accident. The safeguards were insufficient since doctors have noted an increase in birth abnormalities since 1986. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant is not far from Belarus's shared border with Ukraine. According to a 2010 UNICEF report, 20% of Belarusian adolescents are affected by chronic illnesses or disabilities brought on by birth abnormalities. Numerous charities assist hospitals that provide care for infants born with severe birth abnormalities, such as neurological problems and cardiac disorders. Microcephaly, a birth problem in which a baby's head is smaller and out of proportion with the rest of the body, is another typical birth abnormality in this area. Chernobyl's Youngsters Appeal chairman Michael Donnelly stated in 2014, "These children are forced to endure through no fault of their own. The situation hasn't improved in the past 28 years. The Chernobyl zone still has the same amount of radioactivity as it did in 1986. Number 9. Contaminated Wildlife. After the Chernobyl catastrophe, radiation reached Sweden's Galsjö forest. The moment the tainted elk's bodies were dumped in a quarry after being decapitated and stripped of their heads and fur was seen on camera. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant's surroundings include a 10 square kilometer stretch of forest that has come to be known as the Crimson Forest because the contamination caused the trees to die and their leaves to become a dark red color. With few predators to chase them down after the humans left, animals expanded quickly. Wild boars multiplied eightfold in the 2 years after the calamity. Animals don't seem to sense radiation and will occupy the area regardless of the radiation condition, according to radiologist Sergei Gaschak. With more than 90% of the radioactivity being found in the soil, the Red Forest is currently one of the most contaminated areas on the entire planet. The environment has caused the disintegration of research-use mouse embryos, and horses living within 6 kilometers of the power plant died as a result of the thyroid glands going bad. Number 10. Chernobyl Directors sentenced to labor camp. Viktor P. Bryukhanov, Nikolai M. Fomin, and Anatoly S. Dyatlov, the plant director and deputy, were each given sentences of 2 to 10 years in a labor camp in July 1987. They were found accountable for flagrantly breaking safety laws, which caused an explosion. In the courtroom, Judge Raymond Bryce remarked there was a lack of control and a lack of responsibility at the plant. Additionally, the plant's management received harsh criticism for delaying the evacuation of Pripyat. The fourth reactor at the nuclear power plant is currently covered by a dilapidated sarcophagus, and the new safe confinement (NSC) building is positioned above it. Even though the Chernobyl catastrophe occurred more than 30 years ago, many people are still experiencing its effects today. Guys, that's all for today. Which image seems to be the eeriest? Which backstory has affected you the most? Please leave a comment below and subscribe to our channel to keep up with us.